Hey everybody, I'm Billy Porter, and I am so proud to be a supporter of the Wellbeings Tour, and this time in my city of New York. Thank you for joining WNET Group, Public Media for the New York City metro area as we bring together students, educators, experts, and youth to discuss mental health issues for the LGBTQ+ youth. This conversation will focus on how to create and maintain safe spaces for LGBTQ+ youth, allyship for all ages, and resources for how to support LGBTQ+ mental health. We couldn't be more excited to have you here today to shine a light on this very important issue through serious conversation, exploratory interviews, personal stories, and special performances. I thank you all for joining us. God bless.
Thank you, Mr. Porter, and thank you all for joining us for this live stream event as part of the Wellbeings Tour. The Wellbeings Tour campaign was created by the public media station in Washington, D.C., WETA, along with national sponsors and partners. Thank you for all of those supporters locally and nationally for helping us call attention to this very important issue. Now to share about the Wellbeings Tour campaign are Bill Pullman and some of my fellow PBS NewsHour student reporters.
WETA, with a coalition of partners, welcomes you to the Wellbeings Youth Mental Health Project. Hi, I'm Bill Pullman, and I'm honored to be with you as we launch this national campaign from public media. Wellbeings is a groundbreaking project at a very important point in time. Mental illness disproportionately affects our young people and the most disadvantaged populations among us. The growing mental health movement has set the stage for dramatic change, to raise awareness, to reduce stigma, to focus on prevention and early intervention, and the promise of more research for new treatments. Together, we can bring mental illness and discrimination out of the shadows, and it's not a day too soon. So thank you for being here today.
The signature documentary series in the Wellbeings campaign is Ken Burns Presents Hiding in Plain Sight, Youth Mental Illness, produced and directed by Ewers Brothers Productions and written by David Blistein. The film will explore through lived experiences the youth mental health crisis in our country. Currently in production, this 4-hour documentary film will air on PBS stations in spring 2022.
Wellbeings.org and #Wellbeings will be adding new content every week, including
Brave Teens, a digital feature-length documentary that offers a candid portrait of the lives of teens who have decided it's time to talk about their mental health challenges, to support one another, and to end stigma.
Out of the Dark, a short-form digital series that profiles the stories of 3 young people who faced the greatest mental health challenge of their lives and found strength they never knew they had.
Little actions make a big difference. A new animated series shares easy-to-use, science-based tools, actions, and tactics to support your social-emotional health and well-being.
Almost 13, a short film about Hayden Hunstable, who the world lost to suicide in the middle of COVID stay-at-home orders just 4 days before his 13th birthday, and his family's mission to raise awareness and to increase communication to prevent youth suicide.
PBS NewsHour student reporting labs engage high school journalism students as correspondents that report on youth mental health for more than 150 high schools across 46 states.
I just realized I was muted. This is the digital world that we live in, but let me start all over again and welcome everyone. My name is Jenna Flanagan. I'm host of Metro Focus and your host and moderator for today's Wellbeings Tour event, Spotlight on LGBTQ+ youth mental health. Now, here at the WNET Group, the public media company for the New York City metro area, it is our mission to use the power of media to educate, inform, entertain, and inspire audiences everywhere. We are committed to telling diverse stories and responding to the needs of our community. Now, as mental health grows as an increasing issue of concern, particularly for young people, we're dedicated to putting a spotlight on this important topic. In particular, we're focusing tonight's event on LGBTQ+ youth mental health. We strive to acknowledge, address, and celebrate the diverse and critical mental health needs of our LGBTQ+ youth. So tonight, we're bringing together students, educators, journalists, and experts to discuss the pressing mental health issues for LGBTQ+ youth. We'll explore how to create and maintain safe spaces for allyship and for youth of all ages, and resources for how to support the mental health of LGBTQ+ youth. We want you to be part of today's conversation, so please leave your comments and questions for our panelists at the Wellbeings and the 13 WNET Facebook pages, and we'll do our best to have our panelists address them during the program. Now, on a serious note, if you are in crisis or experiencing thoughts of suicide, please text the crisis text line. So you want to text HELLO, that's HELLO, to 741-741. Or you can call the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline at 1-800-273-TALK. That's 1-800-273-8255. Both services are free and available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Now, in order to best understand the current needs of the LGBTQ+ youth mental health, we start with a brief report of findings from the Trevor Project. The Trevor Project is the world's largest suicide prevention and crisis intervention organization for LGBTQ+ youth, providing crisis support, advocacy, research, and educational services. Now, each year they conduct a national survey on the mental health of LGBTQ+ youth. And here to present an overview of the most recent data collected is Chris Bright, the Director of Public Training at the Trevor Project. Chris?
Hello, my name is Chris Bright, and I am the Director of Public Training at the Trevor Project. For the next couple minutes, I want to talk to you about our 2021 National Survey on LGBTQ youth mental health. You can find the full survey on our website, thetrevorproject.org, but I really want to break it down in a few very specific ways tonight. One thing I want to talk about is that LGBTQ youth are at an increased risk for seriously considering suicide. So 42% of LGBTQ youth seriously considered attempting suicide in just the past 12 months. When we look at trans and non-binary youth, we see that that number jumps to 52%, so more than half. We also see that 52%, more than half, carried over to LGBTQ youth who identify as Native or Indigenous. We see that around 47% of Black LGBTQ youth report seriously considering attempting suicide in the past 12 months. And even youth who have more than one identity or race or ethnicity report 48% seriously considering attempting suicide in the past 12 months. You might be like, well, Chris, I wonder why that is. What causes folks with these intersecting identities to seriously consider suicide? And the truth is that it's not that these suicidal ideations happen in a vacuum. The truth is it has to do with marginalization, oppression, being discriminated against in society. Those things compound upon certain identities and can create an increased risk for suicidal ideation. So it's really important that we look at sort of what are the ways that LGBTQ youth do face discrimination. Well, according to our 2021 study, we found that 21% reported being discriminated against on the basis of their sexual orientation. 24% reported being discriminated against on the basis of their gender identity, and around 23% reported being discriminated against on the basis of their race, ethnicity, or nationality. Now, of course, that is really concerning to us because we want to find ways to create a world where LGBTQ youth do not experience that, where they experience acceptance and affirmation. In fact, when we found that LGBTQ youth were being affirmed or supported, that reduced their risk for suicidal ideation. And you may be wondering, well, what are the most important spaces? Well, 69% of youth said that they found that affirming environment online. 50% said they found it in school, and unfortunately only 34% said that they found that space at home. We want youth to be able to find affirming spaces everywhere. Now there's one stat I really want to highlight for you, and that is that if you are an affirming and supportive adult, you can reduce an LGBTQ youth risk for attempting suicide by 40%. Just by being an affirming adult. I really want to leave you all with that. I know you probably have a ton of questions, and I can't wait to talk about it more throughout the panel tonight. See you soon.
Chris, thank you so much for sharing that powerful information. Now we want to open up to our panel discussion. So please welcome our wonderful panelists. Now up first, you just saw him, Chris Bright. Chris's pronouns are he, she, and they, who we just heard from, of course. And Chris is the director of public training at the Trevor Project. They provide life-saving and life-affirming training for youth, serving professionals across the country. I'd also like to welcome Eric Vaughn. Eric's pronouns are he, his, and Eric is the former director of LGBTQ programs and policies for the New York City Department of Education, which worked to ensure students across New York City were affirmed and safe in schools. Eric is also a former high school teacher. We'd also like to welcome Lizzie McAdam. Lizzie's pronouns are she, hers, and Lizzie is the Director of Counseling and Case Management at the Hetrick Martin Institute in New York City, the nation's largest LGBTQIA+ youth services agency, as well as a licensed creative arts therapist, an adjunct faculty member at New York University, whose work focuses on using creativity and trauma-informed practices to support LGBTQIA+ young adults. We'd also like to welcome Dustin Liu. Dustin's pronouns are he, his, and Dustin is last year's U.S. Youth Observer to the United Nations, where he focused on dialogue on a wide range of issues, including the importance of LGBTQ+ affirming policies and LGBTQ+ activism. He currently serves as a trustee of Cornell Pride, Cornell's LGBTQ+ Alumni Association, and as a teaching fellow at the Harvard Graduate School of Education. So a warm welcome to all of our amazing panelists. Thank you all so much for joining us. So up first, what I want to start with is really just getting each person's reaction to that incredibly powerful information that we just got from Chris. And so Chris, since we just heard you delivering the information, I'm actually going to start with one of the other panelists so that we can get everybody's thoughts on it. And Dustin, I'll start with you, especially somebody who's worked not just on a national stage, but internationally.
Well, I just want to start by saying, what an honor to be on this panel. This is like the dream dinner party to have this conversation. So I just really want to thank each and every one of you for your leadership. Right off the bat, something that really stood out to me from Chris's presentation was this real centering around the fact that identities are interconnected, right? They don't exist in a vacuum. And it reminds me my own intersections of being an Asian American and also carrying this identity of being a gay male. And understanding that those intersections can create really different experiences allows us to understand that this data is allowing us to unflatten the narrative about what it means to be an LGBTQ+ youth. The other end of this, relating to my work that I had the chance to do as the Youth Observer to the United Nations, is understanding that data matters in terms of illuminating recognition gaps. I'm noticing, on the international stage, the importance of having this data to help us understand how far we've come, but also how far we must still go to meet the needs of LGBTQ+ youth and to center mental health as a priority. Maybe a last piece, as I was looking through the data, is this real emphasis on joy. And I think so often data can be bogged down and data can be sometimes paralyzing, but to see the centering of joy and to see that so many LGBTQ+ youth are understanding the value of being seen, being respected, and finding community in their identity, that was probably one of the most affirming things that I've read in a while. And I just really appreciate the work that Chris's team had to put in to getting this data together.
Well, Eric, I'd love to hear from you, and especially not just your thoughts on that survey information, but also as a former educator. I mean, somebody who's been in the public schools and been able to not just work with LGBTQ plus youth, but to have a firsthand scene of their interactions with other kids.
Yeah, definitely. First, I want to thank you so much, Chris, for your team putting together this data. This data is what transforms our schools. It's what we use when we go into schools, when we create policies. We cannot we cannot ask students their sexual orientation, their gender identity. So we really depend on partners like the Trevor Project to really do this work, this really essential work. To really help us and be partners in that work to save students' lives. But yeah, I was really, really shocked at how many students found that safe and affirming space in schools. As a teacher, as a former teacher, as someone who goes into schools now in my current position, someone who went into schools, that's what we are here for. That's what we do. We really want to create these safe and affirming spaces. And I know throughout COVID, those were not happening. Schools weren't open for students. Students weren't able to seek those affirming spaces. So we tried really, really hard to accommodate and create those safe spaces virtually. And I think we did a really good job in New York and in other places throughout the city. Throughout the state to really make sure that those spaces were available for students. But it really drives home how important creating GSA clubs, creating those welcoming spaces, creating trainings for teachers are within New York City and beyond. It's truly life-saving.
Lizzie, what are you hearing from all of that information that we got, especially, again, drawing on your experience working in therapy?
Yes, great question. I want to echo what my fellow panelists said around just the importance of this data that the Trevor Project and Chris's team have brought to light. We have certainly seen all of the statistics that Chris was speaking about have been echoed in our therapy rooms throughout the pandemic. In particular, we have seen an increase in symptoms related to suicidality, related to depression, anxiety, trauma-related symptoms, confirming, of course, what we already know, which is that the experience during the pandemic, particularly for LGBTQ youth, has been to really increase the mental health needs and the mental health concerns that young people are sitting with. And I just hold so tightly to that last piece of information that Chris shared, which is that it really takes one caring adult to transform or drastically shift the outcome and the outlook for a young person's mental health. So really those relationships, certainly something that we strive to do at Hetrick Martin, and throughout is just create those caring relationships where young people feel like I have at least one person who's in my corner and who's there for me. So really powerful and really important, especially during this time.
So Chris, back to you. After listening to the presentation of all of that data that was collected by the Trevor Project, I'm wondering if, since this is an annual thing that's done, was anything that you learned in this particular cycle, was it surprising or did it fit with what you were already finding at the Trevor Project?
It's a really good question. You know, I think sometimes we will see something that we didn't quite expect. But for the most part, what we see is that these problems continue to happen. These challenges continue to exist. You know, suicide is the second leading cause of death amongst all young people, regardless of their identity, under the age of 35. But when you look at LGBTQ youth and you see, you know, that broadly as a group of folks, we're talking 4 times as likely to seriously consider suicide in a given year, that's really concerning. And even more concerning would be that when you start looking at certain portions of that population, the risk increases so much. Also, a really interesting thing about data and research in general is that it's hard to make observations if you don't have enough responses from people who hold different identities. So this national survey surveyed over 35,000 LGBTQ youth because that was the only way for us to get a really significant, really significant portion of the population and break it down across different identities. And then what I really want to sort of drive home, I know some of my colleagues have mentioned it as well, but that affirming statistic, about 40% of LGBTQ youth, an LGBTQ youth risk is reduced by 40% if they have an affirming adult. And that can literally be anybody. Maybe it's not their family or their parents or their closest friends. Maybe it's their math teacher, or maybe it's someone who they are playing sports on their team or something like that. There's so many different aspects where young people interact with adults. And for you to be an affirming, unquestionably affirming person puts the power in your hands. And it doesn't require you to say every single person has to be this way. You can say, I will be this way. And that I will start with the change and move that forward.
All right. Well, Chris, thank you so much. Now, the other big question that seems to be a big issue, and that is, of course, how do all of you see the COVID-19 pandemic affecting the health of the mental health of LGBTQ plus youth? Because, of course, this was a situation where we suddenly found ourselves, especially in 2020, having to stay home and stay quarantined, and perhaps home isn't the most affirming safe space for everyone. So actually, I'll go around, and Chris, I'll start with you just to get your thoughts.
Yeah, it's certainly disappointing to know that folks aren't finding the most affirming space in their life being at home. I mean, you spend a lot of time at home. And so we would want to hope that everybody is experiencing tight-knit, close, affirming family or caregiving environments. But, school is a great opportunity, and folks spend a lot of time in school as well. We're talking, 8 hours a day, Monday through Friday, and that's not even including extracurriculars.
Well, Eric, I mean, since we brought up school, how do you see the way, but seriously though, I mean, there was a lot of talk about the fact that while COVID was difficult for adults, it was really hard on kids. And I would imagine for LGBTQ plus youth, it would have been even more challenging.
Jenna, definitely. I put myself in these kids' shoes and think about them all the time. When being a gay Black man who grew up in Harlem, I don't know how I would have survived a week at home with my parents, let alone a year plus that some of these kids had to endure, especially our students who are not coming from these affirming households. And we're unfortunately seeing more and more of that. And we got to see that more so during COVID, as we were getting reports, students were still reaching out. They were asking us to meet them. They were reaching out to their GSA advisors, their teachers, looking for those safe spaces. It was really, really sad. And it really put emphasis on how much we need our schools, how much we need these spaces for youth to go to, because it's one thing to, to have school open and students seek that safety within schools. It's another thing when they closed and they had no place to go, and we really got to see that firsthand. And to be honest with you, we did not have the solution or the safety net in place to provide those students with. So we saw a lot of students, unfortunately, fall through the cracks and have to deal with homophobic parents or transphobic parents, and it put a huge weight on their mental health.
Of course. Well, we will be keeping this conversation going, and I want to thank the panelists for their thoughts. We're going to return in a little while to discuss how both adults and peers can help create safe spaces for LGBTQ plus youth. As we begin this discussion, let's learn about the story of one local young person, a trans student and his mom, and how they supported each other throughout his transition.
My name is Naima and I'm 17. I'm a trans female to male person, and I go by he, him. I've been making art for like my whole life now. Like, it's just been a very integral part of who I am.
I very vividly remember when Naima began his artistic journey. He was 3 years old. One day, Naima and I came here and went to the Egyptian gallery, and I sat down and just started drawing shapes and bowls and things. And Naima plopped down next to me.
I asked her for a piece of paper, and I've been drawing ever since.
Oh, wow. I remember all this.
When I was little, I realized that I had like same-sex attraction to like girls and stuff like that. And then in middle school, like in 8th grade, I came out as a lesbian.
Most of my teenage through adult life, I feel like I've been surrounded by folks in the LGBTQ community. So that's why when he came out as a lesbian, it was like, okay, yes.
As I got into high school and as I started dating, I realized that there were certain terms that made me uncomfortable, like girlfriend and the word lesbian. Gender euphoria is the feeling that you get from when your identity is reaffirmed. And I realized that I found a lot of gender euphoria when people would say he, him, or would mistake me for male. So I came out as trans. When I came out to my mom, it was in the midst of a just like a realization like, whoa, like I want to be male.
In my work as an educator at the school that I work at, we had a couple of kids transitioning before Naima came out to me. So we literally got professional development about gender and gender identity and expression. And I was so grateful now for having had that. For me, Naima being trans meant that the gender or sex assigned at birth didn't match how he identified. So we just started to talk about, what that meant to him and how he understood himself. The Ackermann Institute, which is here in New York, presented the PD at my school. So immediately I was like, well, that's where we're going. And then started doing support group work, and now we are also in family therapy there. As they've said to us at Ackermann, when one person in a family transitions, the whole family transitions. And so being able to own your journey around all of it is really super important, because this is an adjustment for everyone, and you're not gonna get it right all the time.
I go to Frank Sinatra School of the Arts, and I'm a junior.
With Naima's permission, because I've never disclosed Naima's identity without his permission, I called the principal at Naima's school and was like, we need to have a conversation. I didn't have a specific plan. I think I had a couple of outcomes. One was to feel affirmed in our journey, and 2 was to make sure that the correct pronouns were used for Naima. And also, just to kind of make sure that they understood that this is a safety thing. And so what are you doing to help your staff get stronger around this and help me as a mom know that that's really happening? And my phone call with the principal, I have to say, it was like so right on. So that helped me feel a lot better.
Because there's a very large LGBT population at the school. I think the school does a very good job at honoring those identities and allowing people to navigate that. You want institutional support for who you are, so when the school is like, yes, that's you, and you could use the boy bathroom if you feel like it, and you could use the guys' locker room if you feel like it. That was very, very reaffirming. But I wish that the school had informed the teachers, because some teachers just don't know. Like, I got into a very awkward situation with a Spanish teacher, because in Spanish, everything's divided by gender. So when I had used masculine adjectives, she was like, wait a minute, hold up, are you going by he, him pronouns? And then because she didn't know that my mom already knew, she had to uncomfortably use feminine pronouns to identify me. So yeah, there still needs to be things like that taken into account.
My advice to schools would be to train your staff around these issues, because even if you don't have them now, you will in the future. I feel like too often the perception of the challenges that other people put on trans folks makes their lives horrible, and our journey has just not been that. One of the only places where I maybe felt a little apprehension or fear, which I've since kind of moved past, was, the idea of like, I have a man of color that I'm raising now, and what did I not teach you all those years that I would have taught you? But for me, this has always been a celebration. Whether Naima was lesbian, now Naima's trans, it's always been something that I felt I needed to and had to affirm. My kid is still my kid and has always been my kid.
I feel like a lot of the reason why I was able to find myself is because I was given a lot of space to figure out what my identity means to me and how I identify.
I definitely think Naima's happier. I just think he's so secure in a way that I think maturity is a part of it, but I also think his truth is a part of it.
That was an incredibly powerful video that we just saw. And I want to turn back to our panelists and bring them into the discussion to get all of their thoughts. And I'd actually like to start with Lizzie and get your thoughts on what does it mean to be an ally, and was that a good example of strong allyship for a trans young person?
That's such a great question, Jenna. I think about allyship all the time in terms of how people can show up, cis folks can show up and support trans and non-binary folks, and how straight folks can show up and support members of the LGBTQ community around their sexual orientation. And I just think it was such a powerful example, the way that Naima's mom really checked for consent along the way, sort of saying, hey, Naima, let's see if we can have a conversation with your school, making sure that she was checking in with him before doing that, and really going in and asking the school and saying, how are you going to create a safe space for my child coming into the space? And really, it sounds like the school did a beautiful job of creating a comprehensive plan around how to support Naima in terms of helping him understand which spaces, the bathrooms, figuring out where he needed to go in terms of having conversations with his teachers. And it sounds like there were also some suggestions they had there around how the school could have been more helpful in making sure that every single teacher that came across Naima was able to understand his process and how to help hold space for him. And I also want to highlight one last thing, which is that Naima's mom was really stressing reaching out for support, and the fact that they were able to go to Ackermann Institute and seek support through family therapy, I think is also really beautiful. That piece that she said around when one person transitions, the whole family transitions. And I think that's exactly it. So really giving space for everybody in the family to be able to process and support, in this case, Naima.
Dustin, how do you think that allyship connects with the mental health of a young person, especially someone who is transitioning?
I mean, what a powerful question, and what a powerful video for us to sort of unpack how that affirming adult really does make a difference. What I saw there were simple interactions and actions that the school took, and the fact that practices and policies that we place in our school system have an immense impact on the mental health of young people. Something that really stood out to me that Naima shared was this understanding of space, having the space or having the supports or having the people to go to have these conversations, having the space to explore his own identity, right? And I think that at the end of the day comes down to having spaces where we are heard, seen, and respected, and having the space to really explore who we are. Asking these really difficult questions requires support. And when I think about allyship, it's providing that space where someone can be seen, heard, and respected in the way that they want to be seen, and also given the space and the opportunity to ask questions of who am I, and be affirmed in that journey that is often quite messy for young people. When I think about allyship, specifically allyship that we can provide in school environments, I'm often drawn to this idea that these simple interactions matter, that we're giving students the space to ask questions, that we're not imposing this idea of identity on them. We're saying that you have to figure it out. By giving them the space to do that work, I think that we significantly improve young people's abilities to have and practice positive mental health practices.
So the video, again, Naima's story was just so powerful and so moving and very inspirational. But Chris, I wonder, from the research that the Trevor Project has done, Is that school, I feel like the question really should be how much of an outlier is that school, considering some of what we're hearing coming from other districts from other parts of the country?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think we would want everybody to have that experience, right? Where, not only are their caregivers, their parents, their sort of at-home community supporting them, having their back, but also, the school administrators and the teachers. And even though there was sort of a mention of a couple of hiccups along the way, maybe, being misgendered in Spanish class, or not quite understanding how identity might look when communicating with parents and things like that. What we would hope is that largely that was the experience of all trans youth everywhere. However, we know that that's not the experience of all trans youth everywhere. And it isn't just about sort of larger cities are better, for trans folks across the board. I think what you'll find is that some schools are more equipped. Some schools are able to counteract any sort of anti-trans bias that might exist in their administrators, their faculty, their staff. And other schools maybe don't combat that bias. They don't address it, and they aren't creating as safe of a space as they could be. And we can look at it in sort of a direct way in one city, or we could look at it nationally. And what you'll see is that folks have such inconsistent experiences. And it would be great if we could all agree that we will put trans youth first, that we will put students first, that we will support and affirm the identities of the youth in our care. I would love to see that across the board.
Well, let me then ask, Eric, your thoughts on having worked with at least the New York City school system. I mean, schools are made up of all sorts of people come together to work in schools, and some people might have trouble or resistance to this kind of inclusion. And I'm wondering, how does a school administrator begin to work with someone who works in a school, could be an excellent teacher, but is just resistant or doesn't perhaps really understand the importance of gender affirmation, especially for a young person?
Yeah, I'm so glad you asked me that question. And I'm so glad I am not employed by the Department of Education at this present moment, so I can give you an honest answer, an honest account on that. But yeah, we see it all the time, especially in New York, where we think that it's the most progressive city in the world, and in a lot of ways we are, but there are still a lot of teachers, a lot of principals, a lot of administrators that still bring their own identities into that space, into that educational space where it's supposed to be a safe space for youth, and they bring their own ideas, and sometimes those conflict with the safety and the affirmation of our LGBTQ youth. So we have positions like my former position as an LGBTQ liaison to make sure that everyone is trained and aware of policies, and we create policies that are that go out to schools around the board, so everyone has to follow the same exact protocol. New York is one of the first to do it, is the first to do it. I know other cities are following. I'm currently now in Florida, where we are working really, really hard on getting into schools. The organization I work with now, we're a little bit behind when it comes to that. But New York was one of the first to say we need an LGBTQ liaison to go into schools to make sure that these students feel safe and affirmed. And other cities are like looking and following suit, and it's doing wonders for the morale in schools, for our GSA clubs, and for student health as a whole.
Okay, all right. I think we might have time for one last question, but more importantly, I think we do have to move on. So we're going to keep the conversation going. And for this, we're going to bring in another video from Storywall, a national partner. In public media, we know how powerful it is to hear the stories of people in our communities, particularly when it comes to conversations around important topics like mental health. So we want everyone to take a look at this next video from with the Wellbeing Story Wall, and then we'll hear from another local student reporter about the mental health issues facing LGBTQ youth in our area.
The We Are Wellbeings Story Wall is a central part of the wellbeings.org website, social media platform, and the Wellbeings National Tour. We are asking the public of all ages to submit personal reflections, videos, photos, and short stories to offer hope, to foster understanding, to build community, and break down stigma.
What does being well mean to you? What is the one thing you wish people knew about mental health? What is your passion? What's your story?
Video can easily be submitted via social media using the hashtag #wellbeings or emailed to info@wellbeings.org.
Stories can also be submitted by uploading to Dropbox and live at Wellbeings Tour events. The We Are Wellbeings Story Wall is made possible through generous support provided by Wellbeings Youth Mental Health Project founding corporate sponsor Otska and Wellbeings media partner People.
Naveen Ortiz and Lily Gallo are president and vice president of ACT Out, a club that provides a safe haven for queer students at Fort Hamilton High School in Brooklyn.
I just wanted to join something where it was we all had something mutually in common that we could relate to, which was being gay. So
I've always been outspoken, but never on the level that I've been with ACT Out. I was able to talk about problems that I had that I know I wasn't going to be able to talk about with just common Fort students because they're kind of ruthless.
How important is it that mental health resources is constantly surrounding the LGBTQ community in schools?
It's very important because there's only so much kids can do, and they need that mental outlet in order to really process what's happening.
People were they didn't believe it. They didn't believe that I only liked women. Some of my male friends I'm not friends with anymore because of that reason. And they started to finally catch on and not just be no, she's joking or she's lying or whatever. Why would somebody consider that a joke in the first place?
A lot of the times, the teachers don't even know what to do. Kids can be told, oh, you could stand up to yourself too. But it's stand up for yourself too. But it's not all kids have that confidence, and it's against a bunch of other kids. It's really difficult.
I mean, it sounds like that teachers just overall aren't provided with adequate resources or training to be accommodating.
Some teachers actually go to ACT Out meetings, and it's really honestly great when we see teachers come, because it's look, you can see the teachers that are actually here for us and stuff. And not to say that not all of the other teachers aren't here for us, but if you actively don't try and fix the problem, then you are part of the problem, right? So I think it's really important that teachers need to talk to the students instead of just a poster on the wall that says, you're safe here.
If you could both just assess the resources, specifically the mental health resources for LGBTQIA+ students, would you say that they're doing a good job? Would you say that they need to step up their mental health resources game?
If you're closeted, it's more hard to get the resources that you need. Guidance counselors are supposed to give you resources. They can't prescribe anything to you or anything like that.
I think that there definitely needs to be more. We have one gender neutral bathroom. I know many kids who came to me and were afraid of using certain bathrooms because they were they didn't want to get harassed or anything like that. So I was oh, there's a gender neutral bathroom, maybe you'll feel more comfortable with that. And most of them didn't even know that. I think it needs to be made well aware.
I feel bad for those people because they have nowhere to turn except their friends. You should be somewhere where you are loved, where you're supported, where at least you have one person that you can talk to about anything, and that you don't need to be afraid to be yourself.
So would you say that ACT OUT almost gave you a safe space that you had been longing for?
I know adults a lot of times would oh, I was a kid once. It's okay, this is a different time, and it will always be a different time. So I think students helping students and students being there for students is really important, and I think it's the most important.
Just having a safe space in general is definitely one of the best resources, because there's nothing better than talking with your best friend about what you need to go through and stuff. And especially if they can relate to you, that is that's definitely on 100.
Yeah, I think ultimately safe space is therapeutic for your mental health, and it will improve it tremendously.
So what are you going to do going forward with ACT OUT?
We can make some sort of change. So if we make a change in the school, then we'll be able to maybe make changes in New York, period. I'm just happy that I can take this role and I can help other kids.
Young queer people are really powerful, and they have a lot of power in them. If you can get enough people who agree with you, who want to start something where you can all feel safe, then for generations of people going to that school can have that same space that you longed for.
That's so powerful. Thank you both so much.
Maddie's ACT OUT Club is a perfect example of one of the other really big issues, and that is a safe space. Now, it seems like this would be a term that is self-explanatory, but of course in let's say the commercial media zeitgeist, not public media, it sometimes gets twisted into a pejorative term, something to sort of dismiss and laugh at. And so I want to bring our panelists back in and get all of their thoughts on very clearly, so people understand the significance, the importance of having, first of all, defining a safe space, and then having that space, especially, again, if you are an LGBTQ plus young person. And Dustin, I'll start with you.
Well, Jenna, I love the analogy of the invisible knapsack, understanding that our LGBTQ plus youth bring a lot with them to school, bring a lot with them to different environments where they're not being affirmed based on their gender or sexual orientation. And when I think about a safe space, I think about that as a moment where we can take that backpack off and we can be seen for who we want to be seen as, an opportunity for us to share our stories openly. What I found so powerful in that anecdote about the ACT OUT Club is this opportunity for students to be there for other students and for teachers to come and also be there for students, a space where you know that you will be received, you know that you will be affirmed, and a space where you can really let a lot of those barriers down. Understanding that a lot of students may be experiencing stress at home, or a lot of students may be experiencing stress in other environments that they're in, allows us to understand that when you are carrying all of that weight, you need moments or you need spaces where you can put that down. So for me, that's the analogy that comes to mind when I think about what a safe space is.
Okay. Chris, same question for you. I mean, how would you define a safe space and the importance of having it?
It's interesting because I think we have to do away with the notion that we can create a 100% safe space. There's so much that you can't control for. And instead, I think we should be striving more for creating safer spaces, for creating spaces that are consistently working to be better. Because if we create a safe space and just leave it, right, and we say, it's safe, don't worry, and then someone with an identity comes along who is like, hey, actually, this space isn't safe for me. What you end up having is folks being like, wait a minute, we already did all the work. Don't worry, it's completely safe now. We don't need to take into account your lived experience or something that feels unsafe to you. But if we create a culture or an environment where we're consistently striving to improve, to get better, to listen, to move from a center of empathy as opposed to a center of sort of like inward selfishness or focusing just on our own needs, I think we can really make a huge impact. I struggle to update education materials for any of the workshops I do because there is so much new information, so many new ways that we can embrace our community that we could never just say like, hey, I attended a panel, or hey, I learned a little bit about the LGBT community, all done, because that's not how identity works. What it meant to be LGBTQ 50 years ago, 100 years ago, 1,000 years ago, is completely different than what it means to be LGBTQ today. We build upon our community, we grow, and thank goodness for that.
Lizzie, I feel like that's a good question for a therapist, although perhaps maybe a better question for a sociologist. And that is that something that you see is genuinely possible? Because the I is very connected to, frankly, American identity. But to move to the we and to think of ourselves as an actual community, how do you see that going?
It's a big question, Jenna. I think that it is. I think that it is possible to move into spaces of community together. And what stands out to me that's important for safe spaces is connected to what Chris was talking about, which is that the thing that makes a space safe is not sort of people tiptoeing around and being very careful not to say anything that's going to possibly upset, or, like being worried that something is going to happen. It's being able to understand that as human beings, it's inevitable that there are going to be ruptures, people are going to make mistakes. This is going to happen just as a part of us being humans in the world. And the thing that actually makes spaces safer for LGBTQ young adults and people overall is the way that people respond to those mistakes. So what stood out to me about this last clip was this idea that teachers were coming to the ACT Out group. And it's not just that they were coming and they were sitting there, but they were listening to what students were saying currently and saying, okay, well, right now, it's fine if you have these visual markers in the rooms that help us feel safe. But what really matters is if you're there and you're listening to what our experiences are. And knowing that like some students need the gender neutral bathroom and don't even know that it exists in the school. Or, if you're in a situation where a young person gets misgendered, for example, right? Knowing that adults know how to respond to those moments, to apologize when we make mistakes, and to be able to repair the harm, and then to continue to build those relationships and stay in relationship with one another rather than just leave. I think that those things make a huge impact on community coming together and really building that we that you're talking about, Jenna, instead of the I.
Eric, one of the things that I was also hearing was that the idea of a safe space is something that is constantly, it's growing, it's changing, it's evolving. And yet a lot of times in educational settings, it's about setting guidelines and then just leaving them there for like 20, 30 years or something. So from your experience as an educator, how does that need for growth and expansion, how does something like that work in an educational setting that can sometimes be very staid and sometimes stagnant?
Yeah, definitely. Education, and especially when you have these large educational systems like the Department of Education, where it's 1.1 million students that we serve, it can be very stagnant at times, and change takes a really long time to occur. But I think just keeping your ears to the ground, again, partnering with people who are doing the work, partnering with Chris from the Trevor Project. I love the idea of what you said about this, moving past the idea of safe space, because that's what we were taught. That's what we thought safe space was, this thing that we decided a few years ago was the buzzword in DOE. We have to create these GSA clubs to create safe spaces. But then we really look deeper into this idea, and really what we wanted to do was create a sense of belonging, right? So instead of making a one safe space for LGBTQ students where they can have, really creating, thinking bigger than that, and really thinking about how can these students feel a sense of belonging in every space within the school system, within the school system, and within their community. And that's really what we're looking at now, is creating the education, creating the curriculum that we need, so everyone is on this. Every teacher that comes into the DOE, I know we have some ones right now currently that are really set in their ways, but hopefully they'll be retiring very soon. That is my hope. And then we'll get but everyone who is coming into the DOE, all these new teachers who are graduating, and really excited that they get the training that they need, so they know, and they get the continuous support we have to provide. We can't just do one training and leave it at that. We have to keep providing the resources year by year. When new surveys come out, like the one that we saw today, we have to make sure that those are in the hands of the people who are making the changes within our school systems, and that's how it's going to change.
Okay, well, we do have an audience question. This one is coming from Hannah, and Hannah is asking that while there is a lot of conversation around how adults can affirm young people, what is it that other kids can do to support other kids? And Chris, I'll go back to you and just get your thoughts. How can kids support kids?
It's a really good question. I think, there is a big focus on what can adults do? Adults need to do it. And I think the reason that we have such a focus on that is because adults are usually the ones who kind of mess things up, right? Adults are the ones who create policies that are rooted in bigotry and hate. Adults are the ones who create laws that are just targeted at hurting and dismantling certain identities on the basis of their own ideology. And so we have this huge focus on, we got to fix that, we got to fix that. And we forget that one of the greatest sources of strength is friends, friendship, empathy. As a queer person, as a trans person myself, what I can tell you is the idea of chosen family reverberates through every aspect of my identity. I have friends who are family because those people who are my age, who are in my peer group, who bolstered me when I was in school, they are the ones who have my back. They are the ones who have got me. And so I think if you're looking at a friend of yours, let's say you're a young person and a friend of yours is like, hey, I think I might be trans, or I think I have this identity, be the person to immediately say, thank you so much for sharing that with me. I am so honored that you were willing to tell me. And you know what? I got your back. Whatever you need, I'm there for you. Because if you show up in that way, you have made a lifelong impact on that person. And you have the ability to show up in that way for anybody by just embracing them for their authentic selves.
All right. Well, unfortunately, we are going to have to leave it there because next we're going to hear from another PBS NewsHour student reporter with more information on youth mental health resources nationally and around the New York City metro area. Then you'll learn about one of our very own initiatives from the WNET group that provides resources for educators called Understanding LGBTQ+ Identity.
WNET, along with Wellbeings, has created a resource toolkit to help you or someone you care about find mental health resources both nationally and right here in New York City metro area. This mental health resource toolkit can be found at wellbeings.org/WNET-resources.
In order for students to learn and reach their full potential, they have to feel safe, seen, and celebrated for who they are. So in collaboration with the New York City Department of Education, we've created curriculum materials to help educators support LGBTQ+ students.
The impact of the lavender scare was long-lasting.
The Understanding LGBTQ+ collection.
An oppressive society will dehumanize and degenerate everyone involved.
Free at pbslearningmedia.org.
Hi, my name is Mary Kennedy, and I'm a senior producer at the WNET group in the Kids Media and Education Department. And I'm thrilled to be here. Today, I'll be talking with you about the LGBTQ+ Identity Collection, a toolkit for educators on PBS Learning Media. This collection offers a series of digital media resources to help educators understand and effectively address the complex and difficult issues at times faced by LGBTQ students. The collection features short videos that deliver candid personal narratives illustrating larger conversations about gender, sexuality, social norms, and identity development. The video content includes materials to facilitate their use in the classroom or professional development settings to help promote awareness, safer spaces, self-care, and mental health. This work really rests in the belief that students can't learn and grow to reach their full potential if they don't feel safe and seen in school and in life. And this collection provides educators with the tools they need to be the advocate and ally their LGBTQ students need. So now I'm going to share my screen and take you to the site where all this content lives. So here's Learning Media. It is a free service with tens of thousands of classroom-ready resources aligned with national and state standards. I'm going to take us right to our collection. And searching LGBTQ, you can see here on the side, you can search by grade level, subject area, or resource type. I'm going to take us to the collection here, and it has two sections: professional development and classroom resources. Don't have a lot of time today, so I'm just going to do really quick information here. I'm going to start with the print resources, and we have a teacher's guide, early grade support guide, and growing up LGBT in America, as well as a GSA checklist, which is a checklist teachers can use with their students who are interested in starting a gender sexuality alliance group at their school. And then for the video resources, we have content on how to be an ally, representation and support in schools, mental health and self-care, combating homophobia and transphobia, real-time tips, and race visibility in safer spaces, just to name a few. I can only feature one today, so I'm going to pick the mental health and self-care. And with this video, it features psychotherapist Omar Torres talking about the benefits of therapy, the importance of self-care, and the implications of intersectionality on personal identity. And over here to the side of the video, you can see there's support materials for teachers and support materials for use with students. If I click on the For Teachers section, you can see there's a mental health resources guide features different resources, links to different websites like the Trevor Project, It Gets Better, National Alliance on Mental Health, and the LGBT National Help Center. And then we have the support materials for students. In addition to those, the handouts, we have discussion questions, both comprehension and critical thinking. So you can really unpack the content that's in this video using these questions here. That's all the time I have today. I hope you enjoyed seeing this collection, getting information about this fantastic work that we're doing at the station. It was my pleasure to share it with you, and thank you for joining me today.
Next, we have a preview from the upcoming Ken Burns documentary, Hiding in Plain Sight, which is set to air in the spring of 2022. Now, this film takes a look at the experiences of young people living with mental health conditions with a focus on the importance of awareness and compassion. It shines a clear light on what life is like for these young people, as well as for their parents, teachers, friends, and the healthcare providers in their lives.
When you're a teenager, you're at a certain stage in your life where you're kind of like a beginner. It's kind of like a first try at everything in life. And when something abrupt, like someone you know dying from suicide, happens, it hits like a wrecking ball. Everyone is different. Very different. It's very difficult to understand what to do from there.
I never really got a chance to explore my identity until I moved here. The community here is so much more accepting. I started to wear more feminine clothes, started to wear makeup every day. It was good at first, but the day I went to school with pink hair, my car ended up getting vandalized and someone wrote queer on the back windshield. And there's a lot of non-binary kids that are depressed. It's not a symptom of being non-binary, it's a symptom of being marginalized by a society that doesn't accept us.
I think everyone thinks, not my kid. You know, this won't happen to my kid.
The first time they ever found out, they found empty pill bottles in my bag. I think they just hoped that I was just testing things out. They grounded me and they took my phone away. It didn't do anything. It didn't matter how many consequences I got, nothing was enough to stop me from taking what I wanted. My life was gonna end one way, and that was being addicted to drugs, so why not start now?
I was sort of eating for comfort, and then I would get upset at how much I ate, you know, feel ashamed, and I would have to find a way to get rid of it, and I would just exercise to burn off that same amount of calories. I would wake up in the middle of the night while my roommate was sleeping, and I would start working out. And that's sort of how it spiraled at first. I spend a lot of time in the grocery store when I go. It's overwhelming. You don't have to do drugs and alcohol, but you do have to eat. And you have to eat every day. So food is not really something that I can escape.
I think it's so hard to find an Indigenous person that hasn't dealt with mental illness or some sort of abuse. That's in me, that's within my DNA and myself, and that's something that I have to deal with. Why I wasn't taught my language was because it was literally beaten out of my great-grandparents. The things my ancestors went through, it's shown through alcohol abuse, addictions, non-stable families, toxic relationships. That's the burden that Indigenous youth deal with every day. You're just born into it. Birthright. So not only is trauma embedded in my DNA, but so is resilience. So I know for a fact that my ancestors and my elders, they're rooting for me and they want me to do good. I'll share my story over and over again. I'll go through, those emotions like a million times if it helps one person. In some ways it heals that little scar. It takes away from it.
One of the priorities of the Wellbeings Tour and tonight's event is to provide local and national resources to support LGBTQ+ youth mental health. In addition to the resources you just heard about, you can find even more on the event page for tonight at wellbeings.org/WNET. Again, that's wellbeings.org/WNET. And scroll down to find the resource toolkit. As we near the end of our event, we turn turn back to our panel to hear about their favorite resources and some concluding thoughts. So to welcome everyone back again, and I'd like to start sort of a round robin with everyone. What are some of your favorite resources to support LGBTQ plus youth mental health? And I will start with Eric from education.
Awesome. Okay, so I think we heard of some great ones today. The Ackermann Institute is amazing. I have a feeling that Chris is going to say this, but I want to beat him to it and say the Trevor Project is terrific, a terrific resource. I'm currently working with an amazing organization here in Florida, but we do work in New York and called Community Tampa Bay, and we do anti-discrimination work. So really trying to end all types of discrimination for youth and for adults. But yeah, the PFLAG is terrific, and we have the New York City Department of Education has a wonderful, wonderful relationship and partnership with PFLAG. So if you do need any trainings, or if you're an educator out there and you are looking for trainings, we have partnerships with PFLAG, the Trevor Project, Ackermann, many different organizations that do terrific work, as well as the LGBTQ Center.
Lizzie, same question. What are some of your favorite resources for LGBTQ plus youth?
Yeah, it's a great question. I'll try to build on the list that Eric started. I'm partial because I work there, but I would also add that the Hedrick Martin Institute is a fantastic place for young people to get resources because we provide things like free therapy, we have free med management, help with jobs, paid internships, support groups, lots of really amazing resources for academics and for housing, for case management, for things associated with state IDs and pretty much anything. We're kind of a one-stop shop. So we really try to create space where anyone can come and have access to things. Connected to resources for youth who are experiencing homelessness or unstable housing. I think the Ali Forney Center is a beautiful resource and place where young people can go to seek support. And the Door also offers some beautiful spaces, workshops, also help with case management. So there's lots of different sort of resources adding to those that that Eric already mentioned. Trevor Project is definitely a place where we refer young people to, and PFLAG is one of our go-to places for parents or family members who are looking to support the LGBTQ young adults in their lives. So that's a starting list.
Dustin, same question for you. Some of your favorite resources.
I mean, Jenna, as Eric and Lizzie were talking, I was like, check down my list. So maybe I'll take the question in a different way. And opportunities for young people to share their story, I think, are really important. I think when I think about my own coming out journey, when I think about my own experience as an LGBTQ plus young person, having those spaces where we're able to share our story, building that narrative capital, understanding that our stories are important and need to be told, those resources, those organizations, those opportunities are certainly really crucial to identity development, and more importantly, an opportunity for young people to be seen.
Of course. Chris, I mean, everybody agrees that the Trevor Project is an excellent resource for basically the entire LGBTQ plus community, but of course, the young people finding their place in that community, and especially those dealing with mental health issues. So since we've discussed and we've touched on so many topics, and I realize we really just scratched the surface with a lot of them, is there anything that you really wanted to make sure that our audience took home with them that we didn't get a chance to discuss?
I'm glad you asked, because you knew I was going to say the Trevor Project has excellent resources. But there is something that I really do want to talk about, and that is this notion that you have to know everything there is to know about our community in order to show up with our community. I think a lot of people get overwhelmed because they feel like, wait, my child came out to me as non-binary, I don't know what that means, or wait a minute, tell me what demisexual is, or tell me what you mean when you say that you are gray sexual, right? And a lot of folks are just like, I don't think I can understand, or I don't feel like I can keep up with this community. And I think that we have to reframe all of that, because at the core of the conversation should be humanity, should be individuals who deserve to express themselves and to authentically be themselves, period. And if you approach anyone in your life through the lens of, I want you to be you, I want you to be happy, I want you to feel celebrated and respected, then you can actually restructure so much of the stigma, so much of the marginalization. And let us not forget that when we say LGBTQ youth, these are LGBTQ youth of color. These are LGBTQ youth who may be living with a disability. These are LGBTQ youth across all identities, right? And you cannot just pick and choose an identity to support. We are talking about holistic support for the whole person. And if you commit to that, and you commit to showing up, regardless of how much you know, you have the ability to change the whole world. And that's so powerful.
Wow, Chris, well, that pretty much answered what was going to be my other question. And that is that I think a lot of people, I think especially for those of us who showed up for this particular event this evening, would consider ourselves to at least be with the intention of being a good ally, with the intention of being there to help and support. And so and you sort of answered it, but I'll ask everyone else anyway. What is it that you would suggest that someone might want to check in just to make sure that you're aware of any biases you might be bringing to the table as an ally, so to speak? And Dustin, I'll go back to you. Is there anything that you would suggest, like, just be aware of your own biases, because, American culture is pretty, pretty ubiquitous everywhere.
I think you sort of named it, right? This idea of continuing your education. I really appreciate what Chris shared. You don't need to know everything, but this idea of wanting to learn more, this curiosity of wanting to learn more, is something that I think is so crucial to empathy. Having teachers that are willing to learn more, to stay up to date, to have visibility in the classroom. I mean, just looking at those resources of having queer history show up in my history books, that never happened for me. So understanding that, the system that we're exposed to, the curriculum that we're sometimes handed, doesn't necessarily reflect the needs of our students. Sometimes we really need to tweak and step in and ask questions as to why things are the way they are. It's just something that I'd encourage the adults listening to this call to surface, right? Asking questions why things are the way they are, and to consistently continue to sort of create a deliberatively developmental organization or a deliberatively developmental school system.
Lizzie, same questions. Sort of like, what are some of the things to, be aware of? As Chris said, you don't have to know everything, but, as you step into want to do the right thing, is it possible to even ensure that you're doing the right thing? Or are there things that we should be aware of on that journey?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think I would go back to the power of just listening to what the young person in your life, or whoever, if it's a friend, if it's a loved one, someone who's just come out to you or is sharing their experience with you, to really listen and to think through, okay, what are the things that I can do to support and affirm this young person? What do I hear them asking for? What do they need? What are the ways in which they are seeking support? And if you're not sure, then you can ask, right? So you can ask, what are the things I can do to support you? What are the things that you might need from me, especially for friends and family members who are allies, right? Being able to do and help share some of the labor that young person might be struggling to do, right? So if they need a gender neutral bathroom in their school, right, you can help advocate for that if that's helpful to them. If they're seeking out resources for support, right, you can get online and start Googling and to look for some resources. Use the resource guide that was mentioned here to find some places and spaces that might be affirming for them. But above all else, you want to make sure that you're just following the lead of the person who you love or who you're close to, in seeking support. And remembering too that you can also then go and do your own work and your own research learning about the LGBTQ community, so that you're not putting a burden on that person to explain everything to you, but you can actually join in that work yourself as well.
Eric, sort of tweak the question a little bit for you and just ask, what does support of LGBTQ plus youth mental health look like? And I ask that because as you all went through so many different organizations, support is help, support is volunteering, support also has another look to it.
Yeah, definitely. Support in New York City means talking to your city council members, talking to elected officials, and making sure that money is allocated in the right place. There's one LGBTQ liaison for the entire New York City Department of Education, serving 1.1 million students. That is not enough. We need more. We need more people in classes. We need more trainings. The only way to get that done is by really being an advocate for youth. And also support means understanding as for teachers, for educators out there, understanding that everyone is different. Every student is just because you had a trans student and 2 years ago does not mean this person that came to you today and said that they're trans needs the same resources. Understanding that intersectionality is real and providing students and youth with individual resources that they need at the time. And yeah, just really, I cannot stress it enough, reaching out to the elected officials. They are the power, the checks and balances behind what we are able to do in New York City and in the world. So definitely reaching out to those city council members and letting them know that New York City needs more support for LGBTQ youth. Thank you.
Of course, and I would say that goes for any community in actually across America. All politics are definitely local. Yeah. I want to give a big, big thank you to all of our incredible panelists and the audience for joining us tonight and engaging in this incredibly important topic. Now, before we end, we have a special performance from a new musical called Trevor. Trevor's a deeply moving and funny story of self-discovery and power of acceptance. Trevor the musical is about living your best life with a ton of passion and just a touch of pizzazz. Enjoy.
Is it my imagination? Like it sometimes always is. Was I hearing my own story when I heard him telling his? Like a signal out of nowhere, like a light I've never known, showing me I could be something more than alone. Is it my imagination making daydreams out of dust? Are the feelings I'm feeling something I can really trust? Like a world that finally opened, from a whisper to a scream, telling me this could be something more than a dream. What if someday isn't someday? What if it's right now? What if who I am is who I get to be somehow? What if weird is only different? What if different isn't wrong? What if normal isn't how I have to play along? Play along. Is it my imagination, like it always was before? Will I hold on to this feeling when I walk out of that door? Is it too much to believe now that it isn't only me? Is it my imagination? Is it my imagination? Or could it be?
Wow. I mean, I'm so glad that Broadway is back. So by all means, get your tickets to see Trevor the Musical. I want to say on behalf of WNET and the Wellbeings Tour created by WETA, I'd like to thank our wonderful panelists again, our special guests, Billy Porter, and the cast of Trevor the Musical, and all of our contributing partners for being part of this special, incredibly special event. Also, a special thank you to the national sponsors and partners who make the Wellbeings Tour possible. And please remember to visit wellbeings.org/WNET-resources and download the free Wellbeings New York City metro area mental health resource toolkit. I'll give that website one more time. It's www.wellbeings.org/WNET-resources. And from there, you can download the free Wellbeings New York City metro area mental health resource toolkit. It provides local and national support resources. And also, please visit wellbeings.org/WNET to give us feedback on the program by filling out a short survey. Our discussion tonight is being recorded and will also be available to watch at wellbeings.org. So anyone who wasn't able to join us, you can nudge them over to the website, and that'll be up very soon. I want to thank everyone for joining us and have a wonderful evening.